Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future.
Podcasts typically grow by word of mouth. If you know anyone who would enjoy this content, sharing this in a message or by posting on social media would mean the world to us. Thanks for listening, and let's get started.
So there have been some memes going around, people specifically that are a little bit more left-leaning politically, or at least it feels like it's left-leaning politically, that is constantly putting out about how much oil companies and gas companies are making right now with the severe price hike and everything. And we've talked a little bit before about that the current White House administration have put in some of those, and we're going to talk a little bit maybe more in detail about some of that. But the complaint isn't, and part of it's misdirection from the White House. And again, we are going to talk about that specific stuff, but the complaint is that these oil companies are making even more money than they did last year when gas prices weren't nearly as high. And I'm trying to find ways to kind of communicate with them, like, this isn't just the gas companies being, price gouging, that there's more involved, but I don't have the resource, or I'm not articulate enough in that area. So could you maybe provide some responses that can help make the conversation a little bit more balanced?
Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to look and see.
Because one of the memes was like, gas prices, our employment is down 40%, but gas prices are up 50% or something like that for profits made.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to see if I can. So it basically looks like. So I pulled up Exxon, and it looks like they made about, in Q1, they made 8.7 billion EBITDA. During COVID, they, on annual basis, they lost 20 billion. So I think it's kind of like what goes down, goes up, goes down many times. With that, like it's hard. So I think energy industry is a lot of people that talk about it are very politically motivated. And, I mean, US companies don't set the price of oil, basically. OPEC and Russia essentially control about 90% of the worldwide deliverable oil. So even if if oil companies conspired to greatly increase, if they were actually allowed to in the U.S., they couldn't really. So these are basically like investor-owned companies, and a lot of the investors are pension funds, investment funds, like a lot of the people that were pushing, like BlackRock and stuff, that are pushing for energy transition, are pushing these companies to hemorrhage out cash. So their shareholders want them to not grow production and really focus on being profitable. That's one point on it.
Okay.
So they are making a lot of money, but they've also lost a lot of money in the last 10 years too. So it kind of ebbs and flows, and they have very little to do with the market price. But on top of that, they have been taking as much advantage as they can for the higher price, like a Gulf area refining, like basically the major refining area in the United States is operating at 97%. And that 3% is basically downtime for maintenance. Okay. So it's operating at a level higher than they ever have in the history. And a lot of, there's, so that's just the reality of it. Like, it'd probably be good for you to. Yeah.
I mean, keep interrupting you.
No.
I think one of the things that we've been very spoiled as a nation as a whole for how much gas has cost, because at the beginning of the year, I believe gas was still under $2 a gallon here in Oklahoma. And when Hurricane Katrina did all the crazy stuff back in 2005, gas price was about $1.35 a gallon. And we've gone, 17 years, more or less. I know we've had some ebbs where it's gone up, but then we had gas going down under $1 a gallon at the very beginning of the pandemic and stuff as well. Like, costs are going to go up on a lot of areas. Now, I think you could definitely make cases of maybe the middle class and the lower class, their income is not going up with everything else. And that's a whole other argument that we're not going to have right here. Yeah. But it makes sense for gas to go up in price. The fact that gas has been more or less the same for the past 17 years should actually be more disturbing. And then even before that, $1.35 a gallon was, I remember when it went to $1.35 a gallon in 2000, it was a very weird time.
Yeah. People
were complaining so much that it went up from $1.14 to $1.28. And they're just trying to bankrupt us. Man, times changed.
Yeah.
I was telling Brenda the other day that if gas just went down to $3 a gallon, so if we're talking about normally about $1.50 to $2 a gallon, $3 a gallon for a 15-gallon tank, $45 seems fair. $60 plus doesn't seem as fair right now, but I might be biased too. But let's talk a little bit about the reason why gas has gone up, or what's actually going on in the oil and gas industry. There's so many good notes that we have here to talk about, and I don't want to keep on beating a dead horse or a dead donkey. For those of you who like political jokes. So the White House and Democrats are trying to push the blame of rising oil and gas prices on the companies that supply oil and gas. And I think we've probably talked about that specifically more than anything.
I think they're trying to put the blame on anybody, basically, because I personally, Monday morning quarterback, think that they would have been better just being like, we don't set the price of oil, which I remember Jen Psaki saying at one time, is it's a global market. We don't control the price of oil. The president can't do it. And just leaving it at that. But you've had this mixed messaging where it's like, well, the president is really actually trying to control the price of oil and is doing all these things. But I just think there's a lot of people that just really don't understand anything about traditional energy in there.
Right.
Like we talked recently about Cedric Richmond. He got pushed out or left, and he was probably their best advocate for actual industry understanding that they had. I think he was assistant chief of staff. So yeah.
And we're gonna go over a few different things that specifically the oil and gas companies, and the Biden administration have done. If you've listened to some of these episodes before, it's gonna, if this stuff bores you, then come on to our next episode. Because it really does look like junior high kind of style of things. So we've talked about before where Biden wrote letters to each of the presidents and CEOs of the oil and gas companies, asking them to do various things. Well, we'll get into more detail, but basically the oil and gas companies have responded. In fact, they've responded with a plan that has been basically ignored. And when they've sent representatives to DC, despite the fact that there's been lots of saying, hey, we're going to have an open conversation. We want you to come here and talk. There's not been a place for them to talk.
Well, they've gone and the administration hasn't showed up, basically.
Right. Well, we're going to come back into the details. I'm just kind of giving a quick overview of Biden has talked about doing a suspension of gas tax holiday, which can save you possibly average of $2 per fill up. So instead of paying $66 for a 15-gallon tank, you're paying $64. So there you go. But so let's talk about that suspension of the gas tax holiday and why this is or is not a beneficial idea.
Well, I think it's like 18 cents per gallon. So you're looking at very marginal benefit. Democrats themselves in the past have always, the ones that I think are maybe less desperate and more rational about things have always said that this is gimmick. And like I remember Obama saying that, and I agree with him. So it's kind of like one of those things from a political sense. I don't understand why you would even bring it up, because it's not going to do anything really. If you save $3 off, like you said, off of a 60 plus gallon tank gas, then nobody's going to notice that. But it puts you in the area where you're like, well, I'm able to affect this price. So I just don't. There's a lot of times where I think that there's an opportunity to inform the public with how things work a little bit better and have an actual realistic conversation around that. Like, what do we want as a public and stuff? And I just really, I feel like stuff like this, I don't even understand why it comes up as a topic, because it doesn't, there's no benefit I see them getting politically out of it. And it just kind of makes it look like they really don't know what they're doing. So,
right. And I actually, for some reason, I got tired of people talking about they were driving across town to save 10 cents a gallon on gas. And same thing with like groceries and pharmaceutical items and everything. So I started doing some math, and I don't have it up there anymore, but on my old blog page, I actually put the math of how much you're saving based on how life was in 2014. And one of the things that always cracks me up, I understand if you have a gas station, two gas stations across the street, and one is $5 and the other is $4.75, and there's not a line at either. Yeah, you go to the $4.75. That makes sense. But even if you don't, 25 cents a gallon is really not that much. It's $2.50 for every 10 gallons. And the people who have these huge tanks of gas and like, well, it's actually more like $15 for how much gas I have. I'm like, yeah, but 25 cents a gallon, if $15 or $20 is going to break you,
yeah,
then maybe you're driving the wrong car. Like if you're driving a Ford F-350 Super Cab and you're not actually driving it for the purpose of the truck, I'm not judging on what you buy or what you drive, but you're not going to get great gas mileage. So you really can't complain when you're paying an extra couple dollars for some gallons of gas. The problem becomes that when you're doubling or tripling the price, which right now we're triple the price of where we were 6 months ago. And for states like Illinois, it's gotten as high as $7 a gallon. I'm sure California and New York are just as bad, if not worse. That the extreme price change definitely has ripples on everything else.
Yeah.
Driving 10 miles to save 2 cents on gas or to save 25 cents on a coupon for your Tylenol or something only makes sense if you're going to be buying something else at that store that you're kind of, most of it equals out in the end.
Or it's just an event that you get,
yeah,
and that's utility fine. Out of is saving.
But I always thought, like, especially when gas per gallon was much lower, like getting 20 gallons, 20 miles a gallon was considered like really good. Yeah. And people would drive 20 miles or 10 miles to go get savings on something. I'm like, you're not saving, you're actually spending more.
Yeah, totally.
So the idea of a suspension of a gas tax holiday, especially for how little that you're saving, it doesn't benefit me to save $2 or $4. And there's people that say, oh, but every penny counts, every penny counts. And yes, for poor people and poor-ish people, so lower middle class, absolutely, every penny does count. But if that's the thing that's going to break you one way or the other, then you're also missing the price of milk and eggs and bread and everything else going up in price also.
Yeah.
The grocery bill has gone up tremendously as well, but we're not talking about it in the same way. And suspending the tax doesn't mean much.
And the thing that really bothers me too about it is it's a purely political move that doesn't really benefit anybody, but you're also at the same process, like these numbers do add up for the federal government and you're basically gutting the transportation budget out of it. So if you're cutting out, billions of dollars for roads and bridges and stuff like that, then for something that's not going to meaningfully change, like that steps that you can do to get down the price of oil is not be at war with your domestic oil industry anymore. And I think that's really kind of the quandary that you're in, is that these are very low profit from a percentage wise. They may make 5 or 10% overall on all their assets, highly asset intensive. Right. While Apple computer, for instance, they have like a 35% profit margin. So it takes a lot of money for it to do it, and it just doesn't work. Like they're kind of, I think, looking for a scapegoat, but no rational investor is going to be like, hey, let's put billions of dollars into building a new refinery that the government's going to essentially put out of business within a couple of years once they're done with their use for it, basically.
Right. So
I don't really like, I think this has really come back to bite us. And I don't really see the point of attacking or essentially getting rid of it, trying to get rid of our domestic oil industry, oil and gas, where you're entirely reliant on OPEC. That just doesn't make a lot of sense for me. So I think that it's weird because it's weird because, we go back to the election, Trump versus Biden. Biden was like, I'm going to talk smack to Saudi Arabia. They're killers and all these things. And, you can think whatever you want there, but you get to a situation now where you're increasing our reliance on them economically and also selling them arms. So, you really look at making those people more powerful. We're kind of in that situation. And look at Europe too, like JP Morgan wrote a analysis piece, JP Morgan Research, that I thought was great. And they were talking about how the oil price has gone up so much that Russia's in a position where they could cut off all hydrocarbons to Europe and still be in a fiscal surplus position, essentially sending Europe into a depression. And they said under that scenario, they'd expect oil prices to increase potentially up to $380 a barrel. And that sounds crazy. Like a couple months ago, you were saying that people were saying that gas could increase $7 from that. Some people are talking about that from the point it was, but under that scenario, you've kind of got this portion of the Western countries that are doing these things that are, I'd say, virtue signaling or whatever you want to call it, but taking steps to destroy oil and gas specifically. And in turn, that's increasing our coal usage. So it's increasing basically our carbon footprint in the process. So we're getting a negative benefit out of it. But it's also totally alienated a lot of these countries that produce core commodities that we need. The BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China. So there's been a coalescence of the BRIC groups and to actually formalize it. And Saudi Arabia is essentially talking to them now about joining in kind of that coalition of people that are, I'd say, have a rational view of what commodities play in our today's society and are taking approaches along that. And they're also the biggest growth factors for the country's population over the next 50 years. So it's just kind of it's a weird thing where I feel that what sounds good is contrary to reality, and it may play well politically in terms of polling, but it's eating our countries, like our Western countries, from the inside out. And yeah, I'm not happy with the fact that we're going back to using higher volumes of coal instead of natural gas. So that's something that really irritates me.
Yeah, and it's so one of the articles that you had preset for me, it was now a couple weeks old, but it talks about, it's from Reuters, which I have to say, even coming from my looking at various graphs and stuff of what's liberal and conservative, Reuters is usually pretty down the middle on how its media bias goes. And it talks about how the White House is trying to blame the high gas prices on refiners for not making enough fuel. But the reality is the fuel level is just about where it was in the same time period in 2019. So pre-pandemic time periods. And the problem is we're just using up too much fuel. What we want to use fuel for is much higher than what we wanted to do in 2019. And that's causing most of the problems that we're trying to run everything. It's just it just goes with what you were saying just now.
Just a little context to John Kemp he's a oil analyst for Reuters. So he's this is an opinion article, but he's a very well-respected oil, gas, commodities analyst. So it is, it's, I like this Reuters a lot. So they're one of, it's just, there's a lot of factors that go into this. And I mean, it's not the U.S. oil companies too. There's not a lot of spare capacity in OPEC too. They're consistently not hitting their quotas that they set. Mm-hmm. So they're a cartel. They meet and then they decide how much every country is going to essentially, or in that OPEC, and then plus Russia. So Russia is not technically a part of OPEC, but in recent years they've joined the cartel essentially. Let's see, I think they're based out of Vienna. So they meet like once a quarter and they decide how much each country is going to produce. And so they have pricing power. It's It's kind of like if a group, so it's kind of like if Apple and their suppliers were the only people allowed to make cell phones, except for one other company or two other companies, like maybe some small mom and pops. It's really like a huge monopoly sort of thing. And, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia really have the largest hydrocarbon reserves in the world. So, I'm of the opinion that we have a responsibility as a democracy to produce this in a way where we can use it as a kind of like in the same. So we've historically used our military to influence other countries by providing them safety and security, or by, actually intervening in certain aspects. And I really see kind of the future of the world. Commodities are going to fulfill a lot of that role that military did in the past, because
Gotcha.
you can't run your military without commodities. So it's just a weird, everything's shifting, and it's a hard place to be politically too. But what I've seen is pretty cringeworthy, I guess.
All right. So if you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.